Hi, it's Ileana here at the Awakening Cosmic Reality Show, and today I have Matt Tracy with me. He is a secret space program experiencer. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good actually.
So, we had spoken about doing an interview for a while now. You have a lot of various memories that we've discussed, and I find it very interesting. The most interesting memory I noticed you had is of that cutter ship when you were out in the SSP. Can you tell us a little bit about that ship and what faction you were with?
Well, it's not a cutter ship. It's a fast attack cruiser with the cutter system applied to it. That came on later. Um what I do remember about the ship, I remember joining as the pilot, or some people call it navigator. Anytime we say pilot or navigator, we're pretty much saying the same thing. It's the person who links mentally to the craft and controls its movements. It's only through the link system that you can actually pilot through, say, hyperspace. Basically, FTL capabilities from point A to point B outside of normal space. You have to have a system. It's the way the system's designed is it's more intuitive. It requires mental connection. It's using basically your natural remote viewing abilities to remote view the site you're jumping to, and then it mimics the signature of that space that you're remote viewing with in the field that's being created by the engine, and then the ship just jumps to it.
And
um
you said you'd created like a weapon system for it?
well, I didn't create it. um it was kind of designed from necessity. I started a couple of months ago remembering being in a situation. um I think we were kind of scouting, doing something along those lines. I don't remember much of the details, and it's just a few flashes, really. What I do remember is several ships almost like lined up coming on us and attacking us. I don't want to presume what was going on. Maybe we were invading their space or something. I don't know. All I know is, um, and I'm not even sure if there were other ships there of ours. I'm not 100% sure on that. If there were, they were destroyed, or there just weren't any. I just remember um, fleeing from them by orders of the captain. They were trying to herd us using all kinds of techniques for several days. We were trying to get away, and I presume our ship was faster because we were kind of staying a little ahead of them, but they were able. I guess we were inside of their space or something, because then suddenly they'd be there, and we'd have to maneuver around them trying to get away. Our whole goal at that moment was just to get away, get back to familiar space where we have other ships that can back us up. Um, I remember finally getting tired of it all. I was weary. Constant. I mean, it's a drain. In constant combat for days. Um, Especially on the pilot who's linked to the ship has the largest drain, because I'm the only guy there that can link to the ship. You know, I don't know if they used drugs on me or if I did take breaks. I don't remember that much. I just remember being extremely exhausted, and I finally got tired of running, and I presented to my captain, look, nothing's working. We need to turn around and do something and attack them. Um, all of our other normal weapons were not working. Um, so I presented to him, look, we're just going to go right up on these guys, last ditch, take it or leave it, live or die. I'm going to get us as close as we can, and we're going to fire the weapons at max strength. We did. I got close to one of the ships. This was when, before all of our attacks were in a fleeing position. Now we're turned around. We're aimed right at them. We're coming at them. I got the ship almost rubbing on their hull, and we fired the weapon that close. It was some sort of energy weapon, possibly a plasma weapon of some sort, and we fired at max strength. It took out the weapon. It destroyed part of our hull, but it blew a hole straight through their ship. And in that moment, they all basically stopped attacking us. It was almost like they were stunned. And we took that moment to get as far away from them as we could.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember if there was any, if it was all human crew on that ship, or were there extraterrestrials as well?
I don't remember. I have many memories of that ship, but it's like the number of memories I have is like a drop in the bucket compared to how many should be there. Like literally a tiny drop in an ocean compared to how many should be there. Compared to all of my actual memory recall, you could probably fit it all into a few hours of actual playing scenes. A few hours compared to decades, multiple decades. So I do have recall, it's just all scattered all over the place. Most of it's single frame scenes. Some of it started playing, after a while when I started adding meditation into my recall sessions. Started learning how to pull them up myself and focus on them more, and then they started playing out a little more, but not by much so far. And I've been so busy with work that it's just been hard to put time into it.
Well, what do you recall that you think is the most important from the memories that you have? Because you have memories being on Mars, you have memories being out in space, from what I could tell while I was talking to you several times. So what would you say is the most important memory you have?
Honestly, that's hard to say. It I haven't even thought of calculating the definition of importance in that realm.
Well, like, okay, what's the memory that you have the most information about? Let's just put it that way. That's the most clear.
Um, Honestly, it would have to be that ship and my time. It was kind of like a mix between that ship and my time um in the Empire, in the Draconian Empire, being raised by a reptilian. One of the times that I was taken, about 4 years old, I found I was taken into the Empire. I was raised by one of the reptilians. His name is Jur. That's Jur, of the House of Akan. Um, so it's kind of like a mix. When I was first starting memory recall, a lot of the memories between those two periods, I was mixing them up, because some of the combat, the hand-to-hand combat training, the actual soldier combat training, as a younger kid, and then suddenly I'm a pilot. So that was kind of confusing at first, but I've started to separate those, started to figure out what's what. You know, I've got one time, I actually remember working on engines as a designer engineer, and then I've got my time as a pilot. Um, but as a pilot, I've got multiple memories all over the place. It's almost like they're not coming from the same service time. I've got that time piloting that teardrop shaped ship, the fast attack cruiser, and then I've got time piloting a fighter craft on a planet. I know the planet has an atmosphere, and I don't believe it's Mars. Um, and then there's my time piloting shuttles on Mars. And then as far as combat goes, hand-to-hand combat training as a soldier, I remember like a couple of scenes out of Kruger, um, having one of those, having that harness. It's like a exoskeleton grafted to me. Um, and then there's the time with Jur. I actually served at, I honestly don't know what my job was with the reptilians. I basically did what the Draco I was assigned to said to do, and it was all kinds of stuff. Mostly bodyguard work, some intermediary work, messages back and forth between the Draco and the Germans. Um, some assassination work. Um, Honestly, it's all over the place. So if you want to narrow out your question and maybe focus on something.
Okay, do you feel like the reptilians were your family when you were with them? What was that like, living with them and being there?
Actually, I was very welcomed. I know Jur treated me like a son, treated me no differently than his blood son. Um, I don't remember much of the Draco that I served under. I do remember killing him at some point. I was severely punished for that. I was put in the arenas for that.
So you killed Jur, or
No, no, I didn't serve under him. I
okay.
was raised by him. I was trained by him, but I served under somebody else. I don't know what the reasons were. Um, I'm told by other people that do have memories of that incident, that it was like a coup type of thing from other members of the Draco Empire. I was basically used as the tool and then thrown out the fodder, you know. I was the tool that got somebody out of their way, I guess. And then I was just thrown away after that. You know,
That must have been tough, like having somebody piece that for you memories together. And how did you feel?
um, honestly, I haven't fully processed that yet, so I don't really know how to feel. It's like I don't really feel much about the memories that come anymore because if I start applying emotion, my subconscious stops giving them. In my meditation, if I apply any emotion to it, my subconscious just cuts me off and stops giving them back. So I make myself be non-biased towards everything I remember. So honestly, there are things that I should be upset about, but I don't know. I guess I've just come to a point where it happened, and that's it.
How would you overall describe your experience in the secret space programs? if you could put a timeline together, how would the events look like from what you know?
From what I know I spent time as a lab rat here on Earth in the beginning. I remember being used here as a psychic lab rat. They did experiments, had me do all kinds of stuff. Then there was time training. Um, as a kid, I remember as a kid beginning combat training and whatnot, and I'm wondering if that time was actually with Kruger. So it's hard to piece all that together just yet. I've got time as a kid during training that I think is part of Kruger, but I'm not entirely positive. Then I've got time of being sequestered away by Jur living in his house. That should be during the same age time frame, and it's like it confuses me. It's like my memories are going back and forth. Where here I'm a lab rat and then maybe sold off to Kruger or something after I'm done being used as a lab rat. And then over here, I've got memories of looking the same exact age, and it should be in line, but it's not. Same exact age, I'm now being raised by a reptilian. And it's like these memories are going in line with each other. So obviously I was taken multiple times. I've obviously been age regressed multiple times.
And do you remember ever serving with Penny Bradley?
I actually have one memory of Penny. She's in a uniform with a skirt down to her knees. Her hair is it's almost like a Nordic style um, um, updo where it's all braided and formed in the back. It's kind of like like a bob, but it's at the bottom of her skull. You know, I see that, and she's reaching into the cabinet for something and then turning to say something to me, and that's all I remember.
Um, and do you remember anything of being in Nachtwaffen, the Dark Fleet, German Dark Fleet?
Oh yeah. My time as a pilot, all of my memories as a pilot are with the German fleet. Being on Mars, I remember wearing the same German uniform that I'm wearing out there in that teardrop shaped shift. It's all German. Most of my memories are either in the German fleet or in the Draco fleet, and they're not of the same time period. And when I say by time period, I mean the same service.
And do you feel that what would be the purpose why you were taken in the Dark Fleet, Nachtwaffen, or to be with the reptilians? What do you think is the purpose for that?
Um, as far as working with the Germans goes, it could be hereditary. They do pay attention to those bloodlines, and certain bloodlines they grab more often. I know I'm one of those bloodlines. I do have German in me somewhere down the line. There are rumors of it in my family. I personally don't have any direct paperwork saying that. Um, it's just rumors passed down. Somebody in the family was German. Um, I know that I was born on my mom's side, into a psychic bloodline. So when you say psychic bloodline, now you're talking ET DNA. So they do like that. Obviously, they pay attention to check everybody's DNA, and they know who's going to be better suited for certain work. So obviously, they knew I was going to be well suited to pilot ships because most people can't do it. Most people will die trying out those neural link chairs. Basically, you just sit back in the chair, you close your eyes, and you're linked to the chair almost psychically. The ET chairs that we have are designed to link to somebody with psychic abilities who already has that. That's what they're designed to do, because that's what those the ET races are. They're all psychic, and they all have certain brain chemistries to them. So not all humans can sit in that same chair and it function. And some humans might die trying. Then there you have those humans who their brain chemistry and their DNA is more akin to that, and they can control it better. It is possible to design a chair that can be linked to, and you can control a ship without having any psychic abilities at all, and without that is designed for the human brain structure, the human design. I'm not sure if they've done that or not. All I know is the chairs being used by the Germans came from the Draco. And the chairs being used by the Germans are almost all being piloted by Draco. That's why that part of the bridge is sequestered away from the rest of the bridge, where the chair is. Because in the presence of a draconian, most humans can't stand that. Their psychic abilities are so powerful. It's just, it'll melt your brain. So they're sequestered away. That's what I remember of the bridge. The chair that I sat in must have been designed for a draconian, because it was all sequestered off to its own corner of the bridge. It's not a corner really. It's like in the front of the bridge, but there's this whole arch thing that separates it from the rest of the bridge. So basically, when I'm sitting in the chair, I don't see anybody else. I see a window in front of me that can close and open, and I don't mean by open to the vacuum of space. I mean like it can be completely shut off to where all you see is a wall.
And you said that you were an engineer. So what kind of engines do you think you built, and what was the kind of
I know I worked on field effect generators, and that's what
field
those engines
effect?
are called.
Field effect?
Field effect generators, because it's a generator creating a field surrounding the craft. And that field affects space in a specific way. So that's why they're called field effect generators. All these electrogravitic engines, propulsion systems that people are talking about, they're called field effect generators. And I know I've worked on ionic vortex field effect generators. I know I've worked on solid state field effect generators. Those memories, those are what I'm most drawn to. And I see images in my mind. My whole life I've been seeing images in my mind. And it's like I'll look at something and I'll see a picture in my head of the inner workings of it. So I know that I've worked on them. It wasn't until maybe just before the end of last year that I started to remember actually working on ships. I even remember wearing a white lab coat, and I know that everyone around me was talking German. And I focused for a while, really meditated on that scene. And I remember this thing in front of me. It was almost like a touch screen table that was canted up at me. It was like maybe a 45-degree angle or somewhere around there. And I remember working on something on it. And I couldn't remember most of it. And then I started to remember part of the equation. It was almost like a flash of an image. And that part of the equation finally became vivid to me, but it was nothing of useful. It was a line with something on the top of it, and on the bottom was the numbers 32, 32, and then there were these two lines on the side of it. And I don't know what that means. I talked to Penny about it, and she said 32 is used in the gravity equations. And it's what the Germans use to define gravity in the equations. But I really don't know how. I'm not real familiar with the math of it all, or at least anymore. I don't remember that. I remember the images. I remember what I was thinking at the time. Yeah. Mostly, visually what's going on in the space itself, in the vacuum, in the field, what's going on, how this device creates this field and affects this field. Basically, electricity is an effect of space itself. It's not electrons moving. The electrons are actually siphoning off the energy that's being drawn in by the almost like a vacuum. You're creating a potential difference, and you're creating a vacuum, and so space is trying to equalize itself, and that's what electricity is. And the electron clouds basically are siphoning that off, and that's where the heat in a circuit comes from. It's that siphoning off. So if you have any heat at all, you have losses. Any heat creation is losses. Any electron movement is losses. Amperage, our circuits are designed based on using amperage to do work, but you can design circuits to achieve work in using other aspects of the field equations. You don't have to use the amperage. You can create work with 0 amps, which means 0 electrons moving. And that's how these field generators work. They only work with 0 amps. You're basically creating a static field, a dielectric field. Just like, you rub two objects together, you create a static field. They're created with a static field. And that's what the ion vortex generators do. What you're doing is you're building a static field by using the ions as kind of like billions of microscopic capacitors. So that static field is now creating a pressure on space, on the medium we exist in, the medium that makes us. Whatever that medium is, I don't know. I just know that you're creating a pressure, and that pressure is almost like a crankshaft. You can now move that space. And when you spin the vortex of ionized gas, you're creating what's referred to as a torsion field. And that torsion field is basically a pressure crankshaft moving on space itself, and now space is moving with it. That potential difference is now causing the rest of the space to move with it. And when you create enough of this spin and enough pressure, you start to actually shield against the electromagnetic spectrum. And so slowly, as you raise the voltage, as you raise the spin rate, there's also a pulse rate. You want to pulse this static field with it's almost like Tesla and his spark gaps. The spark gap would be, say, your finger plucking a guitar string. The guitar string is actually the capacitor, if you will, that's creating the pressure. You pulse that, you're creating a moment in time where in that moment you've got massive pressure, massive burst of pressure built up, and that pressure has been spinning. So in that instant of time, that pressure creates a shielding effect against the electromagnetic spectrum. But then that pressure goes away. In the spark gap, the waveform, it dissipates. It's only a moment. So you want to pulse it again. And then again. The pulses, it's not about how many pulses per minute or per second. That has nothing to do with it. It's how short of distance of time it takes between the resting state of that field and the peak of that pulse. How much time it took you to reach that. The shorter that time period, the greater the effect on the medium, on space. And if you get a strong enough effect in this field, the spinning vortex, you get a strong enough effect, the field will reach a point where it's shielding against 100% of the surrounding electromagnetic field of the electromagnetic spectrum of space. When you reach that 100% shielding, you blip out of this normal space and into what's referred to as counter space. Counter space has kind of different mechanics to it. That's actually, it's the interplay between counter space and what we refer to as counter space and normal space. It's the interplay between those that creates matter, creates the wave form, the standing wave that is atoms and matter, what we refer to as matter.
So it allows you to jump FTL and jump through warp space, basically.
Yes, yes. You basically, you're shielding yourself from the effects of normal space. And once that shield becomes 100% shielding, you blip out of existence of normal space. You've created a bubble, basically a warp bubble. And you are no longer visible in normal space. And objects can pass right through you. You can pass right through other objects. You're no longer affected by normal space. You're now in counter space. Some people might call it subspace. Some people call it hyperspace. It's a higher dimension. I like to use the word density because the way scientists today are using the word dimension, it just doesn't give off the imagery in one's mind of what's actually going on. What's actually going on is that there's a transition zone. And that transition zone is referred to today as the speed of light. It's not a barrier. It's not a limit. It's a transitioning zone. And as the frequency of a matter or a form of energy, as the frequency shortens to the point where it mimics the frequency that is light, it reaches that transition zone. And as it continues to shorten its frequency, it blips out of what we know as existence, but it still exists. It's now reaching a frequency that's transitioning into that higher density. So basically, the shorter the frequency of something, the higher its density, the more dense it is in energy terms. So as it's transitioning to this higher density, once it reaches passes that transition zone, it reaches into this other density. This other density has the mechanics of more of like a liquid in the space itself, while here in normal space has more of the mechanics of a gas. And this higher density, when frequencies drop below that transition zone, they become visible in our normal space. They become detectable, and they transition from that more liquid mechanics into that more gaseous mechanics. You actually see that in electricity, in electrical theory. You can actually see aspects of electricity acting as like a liquid, and then acting as a kind of a gas. um
And can I ask you a question quickly?
yeah.
Have you heard of the United States Air Force and Navy putting out those videos of the gimbal and the Tic Tac UFOs? Have you seen those?
No, I haven't.
Um, Basically, they were having the drills on the carrier craft in the water,
Hmm.
and some of the pilots in the air jets, when they were doing the flyover maneuvers and stuff, they saw these what they described as tic tac UFOs or gimbal UFOs that sort of had this round circular um, basically frame, like just nothing, no nuts and bolts, just round energy. And they were doing zigzag left, right, disappearing, reappearing again. And they said that there was like a warp bubble around the object itself.
That's
So,
the field generator that does that.
so what kind of craft do you think can do this? Is this SSP technology potentially?
All SSP levels have this technology at some level or not. Some The higher you go in the SSP levels, the more advanced the technology. But even the lowest levels have field effect generators to some degree or another.
So they could literally bend space and time, like
Yes,
warp that around them. And uh, the craft is in the bubble, so you don't really see the
the
craft
craft is
itself.
inside the bubble. Yes,
Yes. So you see like kind of a white sphere shape flying around in the form of a tic tac or a gimbal, as they labeled it.
right.
But you don't see what the actual craft is inside
Most
of it.
most most of the fields are look like perfect spheres, but that's just the field itself. It's what's inside the sphere is the craft, and most of the time you're not able to see that visually. They've got sensors in their craft, and the more advanced craft actually use almost like an artificial pineal gland as a passive sensor. It's almost like inducing a remote viewing effect that's far more detailed, that's as detailed as the Hubble telescope, but it uses no lenses. It literally detects torsion waves.
Um, and what is the gyroscope propulsion system? What is that?
The gyroscope propulsion system is based on basically the ionic propulsion systems are the earlier work developed by the Germans back in the 30s, and then they gave the technology to the Americans probably in the 40s to 50s. Anyway, that's early work, and it produces a lot of radiation, depending on what materials, what gases you're using to create the ionic charge inside the device. Most of the time, it's mercury that's used, but you can use all kinds of stuff. You can use argon. It might not create as strong an effect, but it will create an effect. Then you have the solid state stuff, which is basically a kind of capacitor that uses electrets. Electrets were developed by the Japanese back in the 40s. It's basically a plastic material that is creating a constant dielectric field, just like um, um, materials are creating a constant magnetic field. They discovered that if you take certain plastics, actually anything that's organic material based, resins, plastics, polymers, if you melt them down into a liquid as they're hot and liquid and apply a constant single direction charge to them, like a capacitor, you've got two plates, one positive, one negative, and you hold that charge there for the entire time that it's a liquid as it's slowly cooling down and turning into a solid, the atoms in the polymer or resin or whatever it is you're using, as long as it's an organic base, which is what all resins, polymers, plastics are, they become unidirectional. They all line up, just like in a superconductive material, where suddenly all of the magnetic atoms are pointing in exactly the same direction. That's what superconducting material is good for. It's all pointing in the same direction. It's creating a stronger shield against the electromagnetic field. Well, these polymers are doing that purely with the electrostatic field. And so when it's cooled off and you pull the plates away, you now have a permanent positive end and negative end that's creating a constant, never ending, never diminishing electrostatic field. Well, sometimes given the material that was used, it can be iffy, it can diminish and then come back, and that's all based on the material that's used. Better, higher quality materials will create stronger fields for smaller space and last longer. But you can apply this in the same way that you can in ion vortex generator. Instead of creating a cavity and causing a gas in the cavity under high pressure to go superconducting, which is what creates the plasma, turns it into the ions that actually grab hold like a crankshaft and can physically affect the space around it. You're doing that with a solid object, and you do that with electrets. And you have this electret now that you can apply a metal surface to actually induce further pulses to it, and you're pulsing it just like you would the ion vortex generator, and it's causing the field to burst, to get stronger during that moment of the pulse. And you put that on a gimbal and spin it just like you would what are those things called, those objects that you spin. And
the tic tac, or
no, the actual
the gyroscope.
Gyroscope. I literally lost that word there for a minute. Just like a gyroscope, you spin it, and as it's spinning, it's creating a torsion field. Well, now you pulse that, and in that moment that it's pulsed, when that moment that pulse reaches its peak, it's creating an extremely powerful effect on the space around it, thus causing the bubble, creating the bubble. And then you pulse it again, and the bubble's recreated. You're constantly recreating this bubble, just like matter does with space. Matter is a standing wave in space. It's space itself that is isolating itself from the rest of the electromagnetic field. When they say that matter is space that is, or light that has slowed down, it's not exactly true. What it is it's part of the space that has coalesced into a standing wave. Within all the chaos, all that chaos coalesced within that point as a standing wave, and that standing wave is spinning, and that spinning effect of that space is slowly shielding more and more of that electromagnetic field that is space and creating matter. And given the frequency spectrum, it will draw others, matter of its kind, and work, and literally create building blocks that becomes everything you see. What field effect generators is mimicking how space creates matter in a macro scale that we can use to affect space.
And would you say, what kind of technologies for engines are the secret space programs using today?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't remember enough to know that much.
Well, if you would take an educated guess, what kind of a system do you think they're using?
Depends on the level of the SSP program. Some of them get hand-me-downs from older technology, like the vortex engines, the ionic vortex engines, kind of like the alien reproduction vehicle. That's ionic vortex engine technology that wasn't given to us by ETs. That was given to us by Germans. Not the crafts themselves, the technology, the designs. We built it in American factories. We built it, and that was basically the epitome of the Hanabu style engines. That wasn't the same Hanabu engines that the Germans left with in the 30s to go to Antarctica and then the moon and then Mars. That was the epitome of that style of technology. And then they moved on to more solid state stuff. So it all depends on what level you are in the SSP. You've got the lowest end guys in, like, say, the Air Force or whatever, thinks they're working on the top of the line stuff when actually they're working on hand-me-downs.
What about the Aurora class Nachtwaffen fleet ships, those big triangular fleet ships? What do you think they're powered by?
I don't know. I can't remember. I know the cigar shapes that are practically the same size are basically two of these types of engines, one in the front, one in the rear. Those Aurora types might be more of a nacelle system off to the side of the craft, but still part of the inner frame of the craft. So instead of one in the front, one in the back, it'd be a more thinner, elongated version of this system, which you can do one on each side, almost like nacelles off of Star Trek, but they're still inside the craft. That's a guess. That I don't quote me on that. I honestly don't know, but I've been pondering, speculating. Yes, I invented that word, pondulating. On exactly that. These wedge-shaped craft, how are they moving? Now, there is technology which has the field effect generator as the hull itself. Now, it's a solid state system. The oldest versions of it uses bismuth, very thin layers of bismuth with an insulator in between, and stacked up, and that's basically a coating over the entire craft. And a lot of these cigar shaped craft have that, and then use the field effect generators for movement. And then the coating over the craft is basically just to negate in the effect of inertia. It's not eliminating inertia and gravity inside of the craft. It's negating the forces of space itself that cause inertia from transferring between the hull. So you've got the inertial effect outside of the hull, not just on the outside of this field that's being created. And then you have the inertial effect that's isolated inside of the craft that is not connected to outside of the craft. So there's a disconnect at that barrier. It still exists inside the craft. It's just not connected to outside space, and therefore you're not affected by the ship's movements. You can move as fast as you want. If you fall down, you're still going to feel the inertial effects of you falling down inside the craft, but you're not going to feel the effects of the ship moving.
And what would you think is the most important thing that you would like to share in this interview today? Anything that you want to share about the SSP and your experiences?
Honestly, I hadn't even thought about it. I usually like to go into these interviews as a blank slate. I don't prepare anything. I just, whatever comes up on the top of my head is what I say.
Okay, so what right now immediately comes to the top of your head?
Honestly, I'm having writer's block at the moment.
Okay, so do you think that we've covered a lot of interesting things today?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of interesting things, some stuff that hasn't been asked of me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So if there's just absolutely anything off the top of your head that is uniquely coming to mind about the SSP, what would it be?
Honestly, the engines are what I think about most often. It's always on my mind. It's like I'm always um, imagining it, trying to figure them out. Um, I do talk to other people about them, and people, some people who are, just speculating on, I think this is how they're working, and I'll explain to them the actual field, what's going on, how it affects space itself, and how the engine creates the field, and they're like, oh my god, I had no idea. um I've gone into far more detail than I have here, though. I've got other people who are actually doing it, and I explain to them how what they're doing works, and they're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, that is excellent because it builds future potential for
Right.
maybe at some point designing something that will fly out there in space and not us having seen these.
It'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, not something that's rocket propelled by fuel. Something that
It's actually a lot easier to build a field effect generator than it is to build a rocket. You have no idea. Um, I've actually got ideas on designs all over the place in my head that I've just taken what I remember, and I'm like, okay, well, this works this way, that works that way. Let's put these together. Wow, that's interesting.
exactly. It's like I've worked with a lot of people from the SSP, and I talked to you on a lot behind the scenes. And your perspective is different because I think what you have is actionable data from your memories about engines, about craft, about how things work.
I've
And you're
noticed what most people talk about who don't have any memories of it, or and who haven't actually built anything. They're just speculating. A lot of them really, they talk a lot like they understand what's going on, but they really don't. They
yeah,
miss a whole lot of points.
yeah. Everybody has bits and pieces of something. And when you talk to each other, you're like, oh, you have one bit of something that I need for
Yeah, it's
something
like you're
else.
missing you're missing this part here. Now you have this part. Now it makes a little better sense.
Yeah, even though the person might not know how to build engines or craft, but they have some memory of something that you might need that they are describing in basic layman terms, but it still sparks an idea in your head. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's the missing piece of what I'm trying to fit together and flip the switch on. So,
It's like that patent that came out. that Navy scientist guy, I really think that he didn't design those patents. I really think it was hand-me-down old school technology that they finally let out. They want, and I'm guessing that they may want be doing that just to see, get a feel for the waters of mainstream today and see what's going on there. So
Yeah.
they put a little tidbit out. Let's see who bites.
The gyroscope
And
patent, the gyroscope.
well, the thing is those other patents are meaningless without that superconductor patent, because the designs, I mean, they're very cumbersome designs, very primitive, cumbersome designs. They're even more primitive than what the Germans were working on in the 30s. And that's saying a lot. So you're talking about you want to go lowest end of the totem pole, oldest technology. Look at those patents that the Navy put out. What was it, last year before that? Something like that. That's it. That's as old. That's the oldest stuff America was working on. They're not going to give you their newest stuff.
Yeah, and it's
But
mostly built.
if you want to build a functioning field effect generator for the lowest cost and the easiest production, look at that superconductor patent that he's got. Forget the rest. The rest of it's just aimless stuff. And yes, that stuff will work, but you look at that superconductor patent and you can build a better engine with that.
Mm-hmm. And they're probably building all these advanced craft, the United States Navy, they're probably building that all in underground bases or space stations
or space stations or on the moon.
Yeah, bases on
or
the moon and
stations.
other planets as well. Like, you're not going to see, when you go to Area 51, or you're not going to see that on the surface of them building these craft at Area 51 in the hangar decks. You're not going to see that in that stuff.
No. Like, for instance, what I was referring to about that superconductor patent. I mean, he says basically you're taking the insulator and putting it on the inside of the wire. You have the metal on the outside. That's basically what he's saying, because what we call an insulator is not insulating. It's absorbing the actual field. It's a field absorber. And what is an electret? An electret is an insulator that has been altered in a way to create a constant static field. So you take, say, a long line of this electret, and you got one plate on the surface, one plate on the bottom, and then you wrap it in a coil, just like he's got in his patent. It even says pulse. You've got a direct current. Now, direct current means a still moving constant field. It's a constant direct current field in that wire, and then you pulse that wire. You're not turning the wire on and off. You're pulsing it with for lack of a better term, a spark gap that's in parallel with it. So the spark gap is the finger of the guitar string. That wire is the guitar string. So you're sending a pulse down it. And now let's say you wrap that wire in a shape that mimics, let's say, a rodent coil, and pulse it now. Okay, it's creating its own spinning field. Now that's going to just the geometric shape in the form of a rodent coil is going to magnify the strength of that field and its effect that superconductive wire is now creating. You create that shape, and it's now going to create a much stronger effect on space itself. Now, let's say you put it on an apparatus that's freely moving. You put a magnet in the center, As you pulse that wire, that magnet is now going to cause that rodent coil to spin freely. And as that thing is spinning, it's now creating a torsion wave, a much stronger torsion wave. You're pulsing it, and you're causing the physical apparatus that's creating the field to spin. And you basically now have a field effect generator.
And you could put that in a ship and fly it, right?
Well, that's just the field generator.
Okay.
Now you have to manipulate the field to create movement. Basically, that device will create a perfectly symmetrical imbalance field. Well, now you've got to figure out a way of moving that field. You're not moving the craft, you're moving the field. Well, you've moved the field by reshaping the field, by having other capacitors or whatnot. Anything that will affect the field and create little abnormalities in the field, making it non-symmetrical, asymmetrical, will cause that field to do all sorts of different things.
And so off of that, you build the engine and put it together with the field to make the ship fly?
Pretty much. The field negates the effect of inertia, mass, the outside effect of inertia and mass that is in space outside. You're creating a shield against all of that. You're not eliminating all that inside the ship. You're creating a shield from the outside effects of that. Now you create little capacitor areas around the ship that you charge and pulse. Just like what's his name? Thomas Henry Morey and his asymmetrical capacitors. Basically, you're creating those kinds of capacitors. Now you have a field that fully encompasses the ship, and you have these capacitors that create asymmetries within that field and cause the field to do all kinds of stuff.
Awesome. So I think we've covered a lot in this interview, and it's certainly interesting to talk to you always about engines and crafts and various things. I always learn something from you that's different and new. And I think we bounce things off of each other, and it gives ideas to you about what you want to, what fits into your puzzle piece of the engines and stuff. So that's fascinating to me. Thank you so much for sharing some of that knowledge with us. And
I hope I've gotten my points across, the imagery at least. The vocabulary isn't quite to par with, say the scientific community, but I hope I've gotten the imagery across.
Well, you certainly have it to me. I can understand what you're describing to me. So to make the parts of the field work and to combine it with engines to sustain the craft in a warp bubble to make it travel in space.
The field is the engine.
Yeah, the field is the engine.
Then you've got the capacitors are basically like the tail rotors. They change the direction that the engine is. They cause the engine to create movement.
Just a more simplified way of describing it. So
you can literally design like that one I just told you about, using the rodent coil. If you use a Randy Powell style setup and you've to it, you can actually change the pulse rates and voltages on either side and literally create kind of a rotor blade effect. It will literally fly just like a helicopter. You're manipulating that generator coil just like you would the rotor blades of a helicopter. And so you could literally create movement simply from that geometric shape without having to add other capacitors to the craft.
And you don't need wings anymore or propellers to do that.
You can have whatever shape outside of that that you want, as long as the shape is inside of the field.
Awesome.
Whatever shape. You could make it look like a rock or an asteroid. As long as it's inside of the field, it will move.
Amazing. See, that's stuff I've never talked about with somebody else. Certain facts about engines that other experiencers know about weapons or something else, medical, you know,
I remember
engines.
using some of that stuff, but I don't remember how all that works. Engines, I remember.
There you go. So that's the aspect that I wanted to discuss today, with a bit of your memories and overall things that happened to you. So thank you so much for this wonderful interview. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
you taking the time to speak with me today. Well, thank you. I hope you have a beautiful day and have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.